I think at some point I realized that I was going to become vegetarian, but I didn't quite feel ready until this happened. And so when this happened, I thought, okay, that's it. The first step is I give up all animal products, and I went vegan. And then, and what happened was it occurred to me that like every other species on the planet, there must be a natural diet for the human body. And so my first thought was, what I need to do is work out for myself what's the natural diet for the human body. And it quickly became obvious to me that it didn't include eating animals. When I looked at digestive physiology and anatomy, I could see we had completely different systems than the animals that normally eat meat. And, of course, eating other animal products made no sense either. I mean, eating meat or eggs didn't make any sense. Obviously, dairy is for the infant of that species. I mean, drinking human milk didn't make any sense after a wean. Why should we be drinking milk of another species, which was very specifically adapted to that species' growth rate, etc. So I gave up all animal products, and I stopped eating all processed foods because it occurred to me that processed food couldn't be natural, and I was looking for what was natural for my body. So I started eating only whole foods. Now, I'm embarrassed to tell you that it took me several years to realize, and it took me overhearing a part of a conversation to realize that eating cooked food was also not natural. It seems completely obvious to me now. It probably seems obvious to you. It may not seem obvious to some people listening because we've just grown up doing it, and it never even occurred to me. And in fact, here I am trying to figure out what's optimal, what's natural for my body. I was at a health conference, and I was walking down the sidewalk to go to a lecture, and I passed by two people having a conversation. I just overheard one little piece of their conversation. One person said to the other one, raw food. And it's like a light bulb went off. I'm like, I'm cooking food. That's not natural. Animals in nature don't cook their food. And so I decided that's it. And I made the decision. This conversation in late October, 29 and a half years ago. And in the US, Thanksgiving is in late November. And I had already committed to being at my sister's house for Thanksgiving. And I thought, it's going to be a little bit disruptive to try to eat raw, with this big cooked family meal. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna start eating raw the day after Thanksgiving. And that's what I did. So late November was my 29-year anniversary. I gave up cooked foods. I wish I could tell you I've never eaten cooked foods again, but the truth is there have been several times where I thought, I'll go ahead and try this or I'll try that. Each time, my body has said to me, you're an idiot. You should know better. Why are you doing that? Having gotten the body pretty clean doesn't feel very good. And it's something that, it's funny because as you know well, I run the world's largest dedicated water-only fasting center. In March, next month, we'll celebrate 24 years. And I have taken many thousands of people through fasts, averaging 26 days on only water. And for those of you who haven't fallen over in shock and are still listening, that's, it's I know, again, I'm sure we'll explore that, but because it sounds like a crazy thing to most people. It sounded crazy to me too, but we can come back to that. But so this, for me, it was, I made this choice, and I ask people here all the time, how many of you have had the same experience? Most people think that, maybe rice and beans and steamed vegetables, and as long as they're getting they think that's a pretty healthy diet. But what happens is anyone who's spent at least 3 or 4 weeks or more eating exclusively raw, especially if they eat the simple diet that you mentioned, which is this diet that I've been recommending now for 30 years, ever since I started doing it myself, nearly 30 years. Fruit and simple green salads or soft tender leaves. We eat rice and beans, steamed vegetables, things that seem relatively healthy. We don't feel very good. And we don't feel very good for very good reasons that will often surprise many people. But cooking food both destroys nutrients and creates toxic compounds. There's a whole list of different toxic compounds created by cooking. And if that's surprising to people, if you've ever looked at the course catalog at a culinary academy, there will usually be a whole series of courses called food chemistry. Because when we heat foods to the temperatures that we cook them at, we're actually creating chemical reactions. And so we're actually creating toxic compounds. And the result of that, there's an interesting process. Leukocytes are white blood cells, right? And so I don't know if you've had a blood test since you left us here, but I hear from people all the time who say, my doctor says my white blood cells are too low. This is from my clients who have gotten their bodies clean, who are eating well. And they'll say, my white blood cell count is too low. I said, well, that's fine. It should be low, right? The average person has far more leukocytes in their blood every day than is actually healthy. I mean, the healthy ranges are determined by doctors based on where the average people are. But we actually should have very few leukocytes. It's just that the average person who's eating cooked food 5 times a day, which is what the average person does, they'll have some kind of snack at least, and 3 meals a day. And that means 5 times a day, their body is experiencing something called digestive leukocytosis, where the body creates white blood cells in the bone marrow and sends them to your digestive tract to help the body recover from the damage created by eating cooked food. And so, to say it another way, the average body is reacting to cooked food every day, multiple times a day, as if it's been poisoned, but only because it has.
And is that the case with raw foods?
No, this reaction only occurs in the presence of cooked food, because cooking food creates these toxic compounds. And in fact, just over 100 years ago or so, there was a scientist who named Paul Kutrikov, who thought, it's a crazy thing, right? Scientists and doctors will say, well, leukocytosis, right, which is the general term for the white blood cell creation that occurs whenever the body's been injured. So if you fall off your bike and skin your knee, if you injure your arm, any kind of injury, your body creates white blood cells and sends them to that site. And they'll say, well, leukocytosis only happens in the event of an injury. In other words, our bodies are pretty intelligent. They're not going to waste energy creating and marshaling leukocytes for no reason. But they'll say, leukocytosis only happens in the event of an injury, except for digestive leukocytosis. And that happens for no reason. I mean, wait a second, hang on. Why would the body do this for no reason? It doesn't. That never happens, right? It's only happening for some very specific reason. And that's because there's been an injury of some kind.